Welcome to today's episode of Keepin It 800. I'm your host, Andrew Stumme, the Director of Field and Organizing for Local 800. 2024 is coming to a close, and we decided we wanted to do something a little bit more fun with our podcast, and so we're doing a holiday episode. Here, embracing the season, we thought we would talk about the holiday classic Elf. And with the person who created that world, production designer extraordinaire, Rusty Smith, who's joining us today. Rusty's numerous credits include in film Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, Austin Powers, Goldmember, Mystery Alaska, The Pink Panther 2, Get Out. TV credits include Teen Wolf, Claws, Alaska Daily. Currently, he's designing NCIS Origins, and in keeping with the theme today, A Christmas Story Christmas, Home Sweet Home Alone, A Very Harold and Kumar Christmas, and of course what we're going to be discussing today, Elf. Rusty, thank you so much for being here and joining us today. Let's get into this. Elf is hands down one of my favorite Christmas movies, not only because the story is amazing and funny and compelling, but I do remember seeing this in theaters and recognizing how much work went into the design of Elf. So let's just get started. Like, for you, what were some of the challenges in designing Elf and this world?
Well, very early on, the director, Jon Favreau, said he wanted to make a holiday classic. And that was his goal from the outset. He wanted to do something that would touch everybody and everybody would want to watch it every year. And one of the models that he had us look at was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So we were paying homage to Rankin Bass and all of these classic, television specials that we all grew up with. And he also said early on that he wanted to try something different, which at the time, because we made this in 2000, I'm trying to think, it was 2002, I believe. Mm-hmm. And digital effects were coming into their own, but he didn't want it to have digital effects. He wanted it to be as much in camera as possible. And we wanted to do a trick with perspective, like where you stand behind somebody and you photograph them and they look smaller than you, so that his interaction with the elves, Buddy, Will Ferrell, it would be live. And, nobody had done this like in years. And we started researching Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which is a very classic Disney movie that has amazing visual effects that are all done in camera. And it blows your mind even watching it. And so we were, breaking down the movie shot by shot, like, how did they do this? How can we do that? And that was probably the single biggest challenge of the whole thing. But the design was also a bit of a challenge because, he wanted it to feel honest and real. And we were looking at Rudolph and breaking down Rudolph, and all the sets in that were carved out of foam, and they looked like cotton candy. And John was like, no, it needs to be more grounded in reality. And then we started talking about, like, well, where does Santa Claus live? Where does Santa Claus come from? And we kind of landed on Norway. And I was doing some research and I noticed that these beautiful white buildings, they would whitewash the interior of their building, and then they would use this beautiful toll painting. And in looking at the Rudolph sets, they were all white. It was like they carved them out of foam. And they did it in such a way so that the characters, the elves, were all in bright colors and they would pop out from the scenery. And then they would change the lighting on the scenery to change the colors and all that sort of stuff. So we came up with this white set language that I tried to actually carry throughout the film. I tried to carry it into Gimbals when he goes to New York, and unlike the New York apartment was white, the Empire State Building offices were white. And the DP, Greg Gardner, really embraced it all. And that became our language for the film. And but then figuring out, because we did have a limited budget, I think even at the time it was unless I'm mistaken, it was 18 million. But this was, over 20 years ago. And the other challenge is we were also in Canada and we wanted to be in New York.
Hmm.
So John also very early on said, if we're on the street, we're going to be in Manhattan. But then all of the rest of it, we had to figure out how to cobble that together with Vancouver locations and, stage sets. And also, then there was the Winter Wonderland. There was there were miniatures. We played with scale, and we had to come up with a way to make the set modular because we would have certain sets. There was a classroom, and then there was a garage, and then there was a bathroom, so we came up with buddy scale and elf scale. And I'm trying to remember if you were elf scale, but you had a human thing, it was 150%. But if you were in buddy scale and you were making an elf, it was 2/3. And somehow that math worked. And so we had to make small sets and we had to make big sets. And we came up with a way with a post and beam structure, which once again was rooted in the Nordic architecture, that we could make foreground pieces and background pieces, and like we could intersect them and figure out, how to make the forced perspective work. And also, we worked very closely with Joe Bauer, who was our visual effects supervisor. And, ultimately, what we ended up doing was we got the set figured out and we figured out how to make the set pieces. But then we had a 24-hour crew. Like I would stay up all night with a visual effects supervisor and a second unit cinematographer, and we would set up the shots. We would set them up, kind of light them, and then Greg and John would come in the morning, and it would still take, 4 hours to get off a shot because the way to make the forced perspective work, and luckily Greg Gardner was very familiar with that. You beef up your lighting
Hmm.
so that you can hold your depth of field. Because I believe we shot on film, unless I'm, also an antique at this point. And the uh, anyway, it was complicated. Even though we would go in and set up each one of these shots, they would still come in and have to finesse it. And there were all sorts of tricks that we did because we were trying to do no visual effects. Like we didn't want to blur the lines. So floorboards, and like we would take like a cup or set something like a bag is in the schoolroom set. Um, it was great. It was a life experience. I mean, I never done anything like it since, and I don't know anybody who would remotely try it again.
Well, it's fantastic because I mean, I was in school at the time. I was in theater school studying design, and that's why I think why it resonated because those are theater tricks, right? Your stage, you're trying to create that depth, you're trying to create that illusion of depth, but doing it in camera with somebody like Will Ferrell, who's what over 6 feet tall, and playing that joke, but doing it with real life size actors, and how you accomplish that on camera. That's what was so impressive to me. It reads a la Star Wars, right? Where you have puppets, you have the real thing in camera, and it tells, to me, as an audience member, tells that story in a more visceral way. So this is you're speaking my language here, Rusty. It's fascinating to see how even in the early 2000s, you're drawing from Darby O'Gill and some of these other resources to create these in-camera effects that really just sell the movie. It really does.
Well, John wanted it to last, because the reason Star Wars lasts is because, those are models on a string flying through a black environment, and it just looks more real. because it was real. Like I think though the concession we did make was we're in the stop animation characters.
Mm-hmm.
We knew we were going to have to do some kind of visual effect for that, but that's the only time.
Yeah, and that I like that you're drawing, like John wanted to draw, Favreau wanted to draw from like Rudolph and those stop motion classics, and then incorporated them into the story too. Which is fantastic. Um, I think also, yeah, Elf has become such a holiday classic. While you guys were sort of collaborating and making this work, I mean, you kind of mentioned that's what John wanted, but did you ever have an idea in that process it would become sort of what it's become now, which is this like top 5 holiday movie, situation?
Well, I was really proud of coming up with the language of the North Pole. I mean, the language of the architecture of the North Pole, because people do Santa's workshop, and it all gets very fantastical and like magical in a way, and we just wanted to make it like they were all workers and loving what they do and having a good time doing it, but it also made it feel homey. It felt like a little village. And one of my favorite sets is also the big exterior shot where he talks to Frosty the Snowman, which we modeled after Leon Redbone, and got him to do the music and the voice. And we we carved that entire landscape out of foam. And one of the challenges, we looked at all these stages in Vancouver, and the problem with it was none of them were big enough. So we ended up in an old hockey rink because it had like a clear open span, and I wanted the backdrop or the sky to feel painted like always, kind of like it does in Rudolph. And so we had fantastic scenic artists, fantastic sculptors, but we had to take that landscape of a set and we had to flood it because we had to get on an iceberg and he has to float away to go to New York. And then we also had to have an ice skating rink. So all of those parts were built into the set and it was modular, and we had to take out blocks of snow and bring in the fake ice. And it was a scheduling adventure. Um, and the little cabins, like, we had a foreground cabin that's an elf scale that he has to run out of and bump his head on. But then the other cabins in the background were all, half size, one third size, and then extreme miniatures on the hillside. And all that with little lights inside of them. I mean, it was very romantic. It was a great set to be on.
I think what that helps tell the story from my audience perspective would be is that it's because it's grounded in some reality. Buddy doesn't feel he feels out of place because of his size, but he doesn't feel out of place, in growing up there, right? Like, because it's not magical, it's not fantastical, it sort of has that sense of like reality where he's like, yeah, this is just my house. I just grew up here. Yeah. And then it makes that transition to New York, so much more fantastical for him, right? Coming out
The
of the
only thing
Lincoln
that's in
Tunnel.
human scale is actually, I forgot this, is Santa.
Mm-hmm.
And the sleigh was another big challenge. John's fascinated with hot rods. You see a little bit of that in Iron Man,
Mm-hmm.
and it probably because of that was his dad and what he grew up with. And we wanted the sleigh to look like a hot rod, so it's got like hot rod struts on it, but it was all built in human scale. So then the challenge was getting Bob Newhart next to the sleigh. So you have to have him stand. And it's actually weird. You're only standing like 5 or 6 feet behind.
Mm-hmm.
But if you photograph it properly, the person looks like they're 4 feet tall.
Yeah. Um, I think you hit on something I thought was interesting is how all these things tied together. Where like the gimbal scene, it initially looks like a department store, but then when Buddy gets his hands on it, he turns it into the North Pole. He whitewashes it with his decorations and everything like that. I think it's just all these through lines in the design. It really showed how much you, the DP, and John were really a collaborative team, right? I think you really get the sense that you all were working really well together in tandem to kind of create this fantastical world.
Yeah, yeah, you hit on something. Yeah, Gimbals was that transformation, one of my favorite jokes in the whole show. But uh, when we came up with what it was going to be, like those like daisy chains made out of paper that theoretically he does overnight, the set deck crew was working on that for weeks. They would be sitting in the office on the phone, gluing those things together, cutting out snowflakes, and then John wanted it to be more. And so we started to dress the set and we were trying to use, there were some things that were scripted, Louisville Slugger, Etch a Sketch, but we came up with toys like, we came through and like, oh, he takes the light brights and then he makes it, make a message. And I remember we were walking and he's like, what else can we do? And John said, we could make New York out of Legos
Oh
and then have him get in a fight with the fake Santa and destroy it. And I was like, oh my God, that is brilliant. And I turned to my art director was ashen. He was like,
no.
how are we possibly going to do that? And so we got Lego on board because I wanted it to be the proper colors of the Chrysler building or the Empire State Building or McGraw Tower. And we had Legos sent from all over North America, probably all
Wow.
over the globe. I mean, they got behind us and we hired 5 sculptors, gave each one a building. We had it drafted, and it was 14 days, I think, top to bottom. And that was an extraordinary challenge.
Well, and again, it's that reality, that real, the putting the real thing on camera, right? I think nowadays you might do a couple of pieces, but then visual effects might paint some more into the background. Um, so it's just great. Again, I'm geeking out here because it's just great to see. It's why I love this film. It's like the in camera work that you all put in. It's funny. I've been on sets. I've been on in the art department working where we mention a white set and the DP does what your art director does and just goes what. But I think again the collaborative effort that you guys had and the trust you had in each other to be like, look, this is gonna work. And the fact that your DP was like, yeah, let's do this is a testament to like good collaborative movie making.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time. I think it would be hard to recreate that actually in this day and age for exactly why you're saying. People will just say, "Oh, we'll just fix it in post," or we'll do it with visual effects. And I mean, there are still visual effects in the
Mm-hmm.
show, but as much as possible, we were carrying that sleigh around everywhere, and
Yeah.
and there were real reindeer, but not flying. So there was a little bit of we had to like do some give and take there.
Well, sure. Yeah. There's something you just hit on that I was gonna like. I think the other element too, especially in the North Pole, is incorporating with the costume design. And you kind of mentioned it too, where those colors, against that with all the elves, really does tell that. I think it brings that whimsy, it brings that joy, it brings like, yeah, these elves are just here having a good time in their really bright colors. It's just and the ability for the set to sort of contrast that with the white is great. I'm like, I'm gushing, but I think you're again, how you're going to give deference to the costume designer, but how much influence did like that sort of decision making have with John and you and the costume designer, like on the.
Laura Jean, yeah, we worked together very close, and for a lot of those reasons, it was. I think it was like a big challenge for her as well, because you want to be faithful to the classic, but make it your own. But the colors, that was really important, and I think it was very successful.
Uh, you so
So
I was going through your credits, like we said, or like at the top of this, but also looking at it, it's like you've also done a bunch of other Christmas movies too, and I
Yeah.
think each one is very distinct. Like I've seen all of these, and like how do you approach? Obviously, the script's gonna inform and your collaboration with the director. but I think it is a testament to you as a production designer. How do you go about making each Christmas distinct? In terms of these, because Christmas could just be a tree and everybody kind of sees it, but each of these movies has a very distinct Christmas look to it.
Well, I think a lot of that, of course, it comes from the script. Uh, the I mean, one of the biggest challenges was the Christmas Story Christmas, probably the recent one I did, a sequel to A Christmas Story, which is another classic, which I grew up with, and I'm like, oh my God, I love that movie. That's the movie I want to watch every year. I mean, I want to watch Elf every year too, but but the fact that we, got Peter Billingsley, who, by the way, is also one of the elves
One
in
of the elves, yeah.
yeah, and good friends with John. And I was what happened was they came to me, the producers, and they were like, "We want to duplicate Christmas Story in Bulgaria." So, and I was like, "What?" And they said, We'll build the neighborhood just like it is in the original in a field in Bulgaria." And I was like, "I got to do that," So they let me go to Cleveland and see the street where it's set, which is now a museum, by the way. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a big thing on the tour. If you go to Cleveland, you get on the bus, you're going to the Christmas Story set. And we did. We totally duplicated it and built it in a field in Cleveland and tried to pay, homage to that. And but that comes out of the story. Like Harold and Kumar, it's Harold and Kumar was like just ludicrous because it was 3D. So it was its own challenge. And of course, we're trying to make uh, New York in the winter in Detroit during the summer. So each one of these shows comes with their own kind of specific challenge.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like yeah, you're giving me flashbacks to here we are in LA in August and they want to do a Christmas episode of something and you're like, okay, let's how do we keep the snow from melting, the fake snow from melting on the street, but that's what we do. Those are the challenges we rise to. So
Yes, Harold and Kumar, we hired the ice truck, whatever. There's all sorts of ways to make snow, and I've done all of them, from paper flakes to soap flakes to like ice. And we were in a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood in Detroit, and this ice truck is just blowing ice all over the house, and the whole neighborhood comes out because they think we're insane. It's like 85 degrees, but this one house is covered in ice and snow. It was a lot of fun.
yeah, the neighbors may not be wrong about the state of our mental health, but I think we're having a great time out there. So, um, no, this has been great, Rusty. I think you know talking about all these holiday movies, talking about Elf, really getting into the design of these things is fantastic. Um, I think one more thing on Elf is what I love about that is such a fish out of water story, right? This guy in both worlds, in both the North Pole and New York, but he does discover, his family, and not only his adopted family, but his real family, and it's so heartwarming. I think what I love about the contrast is the New York stuff you kind of touched on, but like one particular set that I sort of think really highlights that contrast, but then comes to life is the mailroom, right? You go. Do you have any stories about the mailroom set? Because I just that's one of my favorite sort of scenes when like they walk in and all of a sudden Buddy has just taken over everybody in the mailroom and all the ex-cons. But
When he goes to work with his dad, like one of my favorite scenes, and then they decide to take him to the mailroom, and I can't. That was not. I don't remember that was in the script. I think that got added. So all of a sudden, we're shooting the Empire State, stage set for the office of James Caan, and they come up with this, and so we were scrambling trying to find it because we didn't have a stage space, and we found old location it was a Mercedes-Benz factory or something like that, and it was like, how do we transform this? Like, not quite overnight, but it was pretty fast. And then we knew he had to get up on the tables, and we had to dance, and I wanted to do the pneumatic tubes, which was kind of Hudsucker Proxy homage, and it it came together very quickly, but like super fun. And a lot of it's fun also because Will is so, genuine.
Yeah.
I think, one of the other things that, sells, integrates all of that together is the time that we did manage to get on the streets of Manhattan. And when we committed to it, it was going to be, 2 weeks, and then it became, 12 days, and then it became 13 days straight of just trying to cram as much New York as we possibly could into it. And, and it's also about Rockefeller Center, the real magic of New York. And so, coordinating your schedule around like getting, Rockefeller Center, I think we had it for like 3 hours. They would, they shut it down at like 3 o'clock in the morning, but then they open it up at like 6 or 7. So we, had to be all, standing by, jump in, get it all, and get out. And then the last Saturday, I had to get back to Vancouver to like, prep for all the sets that were coming. And they went out on that last day and they just took Will in the costume and they went renegade. They went guerrilla out on the street. And that is some of the most magical stuff that's in the show. I mean, we had the chewing gum under the subway rail. We had that all prepped, but then you're running down the street and like do it here. And then he came up with the idea of hopping across the crosswalk lines. A lot of that was Will and John just like spitballing. And there's even a scene where he runs into Santa. And that was totally improvised. That was just a guy walking down the street dressed like Santa. And those are the truly hilarious, magical moments.
Him going through the revolving door, the flyers, just like taking the flyers as gifts every time he turns around a new one. Yeah, that stuff must have been a blast to shoot with Will, like just giving him free reign to kind of go play in New York a little bit as dressed as an elf. I'm sure was just a blast.
The Lincoln Tunnel was amazing too, because I think that was our very first day of filming, and they were like, "How do we do this?" And Will was like, "Well, I'll do it." Like, and he goes down the tunnel, and the Steadicam operator just chases him and runs back through. And it was, he's right there next to buses, just zooming by and reacting to it, and it's brilliant stuff.
Just don't let the studio insurance folks see that. Just like, just go. Well, you know what, Rusty? I think we're just about out of time today, and I want to let you get back to, because you're currently at work. I see everything behind you, and but I want to thank you for taking this time today, Rusty, and talking a little bit about this amazing movie that we all love during this time of year. And it holds up for, like I said, we watch it every year, and I still laugh, like I did when I was in the theater back in college. So I just want to thank you for this contribution to the Christmas canon, Rusty. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky to be a part of it. And it's one of the, I mean, you're always so hard on yourself, but it's one of the few things that I can look at over and over again and still be proud of. That feels good.
Well, thank you. And I will let you get back to designing and doing the amazing work. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at ADG 800, and LinkedIn and Facebook at Art Directors Guild. And if you have a good idea for an episode of Keepin It 800, you can email Ricky at adg.org. That's Ricky spelled Rikki, and we'd love to hear it. So see you next time right here on your podcast, Keepin It 800. Thanks, everybody.